This is Coffee with Kelly, a dynamic podcast that's dedicated to driving positive change in school safety. I'm your host, Ethan Woodman, Product Marketing Specialist for Crisis Go, and I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, Kelly Moore, Senior School Safety Specialist for Crisis Go. Our mission is to empower you with essential knowledge, tools, and inspiration required to foster a safer and more secure school environment. We hope this podcast will be the catalyst for transformation in your schools. Join us as we continue to dive into the world of school safety. Good morning, Mr. Kelly.
Ethan, how are you today?
I'm doing all right.
Good.
A couple days ago, my 14-month-old little girl coughed in my face, and I didn't really think anything of it. Turns out she went to the doctor's yesterday, and she has some sickness that's
been passed on to you.
Passed on to me.
Yeah, that's why we have kids.
I'm like, oh man, so am I like doomed? And my wife was like, well, do you have a sore throat? And I'm like, well, no. She's like, all right, well, maybe you didn't get it. Okay. I woke up this morning with a sore throat.
That's why we have kids, so we can get sick all the time. Little live, ever-changing petri dishes.
I just had pneumonia for over 2 months. Now I have a sore throat now. It's just like never ending. I haven't been like 100% healthy for the last like 3.5 some months.
Should we just start calling you Eeyore? I have a little black rain cloud following me wherever I go.
Wow, you did pretty good. You could be like the next voice actor for Eeyore if they ever do. Like
probably not.
No, that's not your calling.
Yeah.
All right.
I don't have a good voice.
You have a unique voice.
See, that's what I said.
It's very identifiable.
It is.
You have like a retired cop voice.
I'm sure that's not genetic, but my inflections and my strength in my voice, maybe. If that's a thing.
Man. I actually had what I had 4 or 5 articles that I was talking to you about. So we're going to talk about 2 of them, 2 different kind of scenarios here. So The first one is actually a place that's pretty local to me. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a backstory here. So this board meeting occurs like a week or something after Appalachia?
Okay.
Just days.
Mm-hmm.
And then it also occurs after a school in this town had a homeless man walk in, break in, whatever you want to call it, into the school and basically use their showers. Obviously, there was some alarms that went off at some point, and so the police responded. Their response was very quick. So that was the positive part about it. So they resolved the issue pretty quick. But obviously, there's some question of, how did this man get into the school at night? Shouldn't the doors be locked? So that kind of begs the question of, do the door locks work?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to play a video here of one of their school board meetings, which occurred on September 9th. I'm going to play this, and we're going to hear some comments from a couple parents or people from the community, and they all bring up some concerns. And you're going to hear one that's a very common concern.
Okay.
So the first one is Don Mather. Hi, Don.
How you doing, everybody?
Welcome.
So, Don Mather, 34 First and Road. I hate to come up right after the good news. I signed a petition for door locks, keep intruders out of the classrooms a while back, and I heard there was movement on it. I heard that we approved it. Things were going good for it, and I haven't heard anything since. I would love if we could probably maybe get that on the agenda for next time around. An update for everybody, say that we're working on it, we're working towards something, anything at all to kind of like help the people that see what's happening around the country, and it weighs heavy on their heart because they have children in our schools. That's all I got.
Thank you, Don. Appreciate it.
Have a good night.
You too. Jason Wells.
This is one where just watch this guy's movements, Kelly. I want to see if you like pick up on the same thing that I do, but he actually talks about something a little bit different, not the door locks. I don't think maybe he mentions at the end, but he brings up a different issue that's occurring at this school.
I'm Jason Wells. I serve St. Matthew's Episcopal Church at 7 North Mast Street. but my residence is at 18 Kimball Street in Pembroke. I was upset to listen to the recording of the previous school board meeting where I learned that the business administrator has opened small claims suits against families who have unpaid food service debts. Since that meeting, I had a lot of conversations with members of my congregation and also the general public of the community beyond the church. And the consensus across those conversations is that people in our town would like to step up and collect funds to have them applied to student food service debts. To put it a different way, people in our town would like to see the administration follow the policy given around food service debts, which has been shared with me a couple of times, that, quote, the superintendent or their designee will try to identify nonprofit charities that are willing to contribute funds to the district to assist in keeping a positive balance in the meal account of students. At that last meeting, Mr. Gross informed the board that he had made efforts to contact families through mail, email, phone, certified mail, also all part of school board policy and in compliance. I did not hear any reporting on what was done to turn to the community in the nonprofit sector for help. It was about a year ago that I actually had several conversations and emails with him over exactly this topic. The people of St. Matthew's Episcopal Church wanted to help alleviate food service debts in Goffstown. But now, when the decision time has come to deal with unpaid debts, the charitable offers were not called upon, and instead the administration chose to sue its own students' families. How we handle food service debt comes with fiscal and social responsibilities and repercussions. When a student picks up an alternate meal like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich while everyone else around you has a hot lunch, it becomes quickly apparent as to what is happening. When a family is taken to small claims court, their family name is now part of the public record to show off what is normally a part of student privacy: who couldn't pay. I'll save the rest of my sermons for the pulpit, but just leave a public comment that our church has set up a page online with information to give donations from the community to those who want to help alleviate student debt. stmattsepiscopal.org/lunch. The board should know, by way of public comment, that there are people of good faith and goodwill who want to keep students away from the poor legal and social consequences of a negative food service balance. We're ready to help, and we're ready to do our part to be part of the policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Appreciate it. All right, Mary Jenkins. Hi, Mary. Welcome.
Mary Jenkins, 245 Wallace Road in Goffstown. I have three distinct comments. First, I've heard that a book challenge from the previous school year has been addressed and resolved. It involved 3 books from the Goffstown High School library. As I understand it, 2 of the books were discarded and 1 retained. I hope that the public can be informed as to whether the IGL, IJ, IG library collection development acquisitions and deselection policies would have led to the same decision as a routine matter of course, or if instead the pressures of a book ban attempt led to extra scrutiny of these specific books. Comment 2. I've very closely followed the frightening state level attempts to discriminate legislatively, as well as some local efforts against LGBTQIA residents of New Hampshire this past year. And given that what I consider a threatening and discriminatory climate for vulnerable New Hampshire school children, I hope that this district can point to some special effort it's taking this year to make LGBTQIA students and staff more safe, more welcomed, and more celebrated. And then my third quick comment, not only because of it, and to echo our first speaker's comment, but in light of the Georgia school shootings and the resultant mass murder this month, I urge the school board and administration to take swift and clear action to secure the schools and act on our voters' strong commitment to school safety. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. All right, and the last one is Melanie Renford-Hebert. Hi, Melanie.
Hi, thank you.
You're welcome.
My name is Melanie Renfrew-Hebert. I live at 23 College Road. Thank you for allowing me to speak for a moment today. First of all, I just wanted to say thank you to each and every one of you. The beginning of the school year can be difficult, and we really appreciate all of the efforts that you take to make the schools run smoothly, and our teachers are amazing. As a parent, I had the opportunity to go with the budget committee and do a tour at Mountain View Middle School, where my son is now in 7th grade. I don't believe it either. 7th grade student. I've always enjoyed these tours when I was on the budget committee, as well as a parent. I found them really, really informative. Unfortunately, I was once again disappointed to find that members of our budget committee were taking pictures of rainbow things in our library. We all remember the issues it caused with the bulletin board and some other issues following around that. And our town doesn't need that kind of focus on small things in a great school. And I was really disappointed by that aspect of it, but very proud of our teachers, proud of the principal who gave a fantastic tour, and proud of all of you who keep them going. Thank you so much for that. I also would like to echo the sentiment about the security for the school. I know it's been some time since we had the deliberation on that, and I'm just looking forward to whatever update becomes available when it's available. Just keeping it in our minds as the count of students who have been affected by gun violence already in the school year rises every day. I think they took all of my other things. So what I'm going to say is I hope that you all have a fantastic school year. I'm proud that you've set us up to have a fantastic school year. And I hope that everyone here is safe. Thank you,
Melanie. All right, so that is all I have on my list. I know a couple people walked in. Yeah, go ahead. You can come on up. Just state your name and your address, please.
Nancy McDonald, 34 Fersen Road. And I want to obviously agree with Donald about the school locks. I would love to know where that stands. It has been a concern with other people that I've been in contact with, and nobody seems to know the answer as to where that's at. And obviously after last week, it became much more of a immediate need. That was a very small school, very small town that was attacked. And I've heard of at least 8 instances of bullying at the middle school this year from various people. And, you know, it's those kids who are bullied that very often are the ones that you least suspect, but they might be the ones that come in with a gun. I mean, we're a small town. We don't want to think about it, but it happens. It can happen anywhere. The other thing I'd like to talk about is possible to have some kind of a setup between the high school and the registrar of elections to have some kind of a push to get kids who have turned 18 to register to vote. Town hall is open till 4, but if you live in Pinardville and you take a bus to the high school, you can't go down there and register to vote. So there really isn't that opportunity to do that. You know, it might be nice to even have some kind of a whole school meeting on a civics lesson on, you know, voting and the importance of it. My thought would be to have something like this twice a year, maybe in the spring for those who are the seniors that are leaving, and then in the like October or something in the fall for those who will be turning 18 before the next election. That's it, just something I'd like to be considered.
Thank you, Nancy.
Okay,
Appreciate it.
thank you.
Go ahead, Joe.
Joe McCarthy, 116 Mountain Base Road. Just going to echo what everybody else has said. The door locks, in my opinion, were approved and they should be in by now. That should be a no-brainer. It's in the budget. It was approved. Get the job done. It shouldn't have to be a school shooting. Shouldn't have to be people coming up here to say, what about this? What about that? Get it done. You're the school board. You get it done. And then for the lunches, the saddest thing I've ever heard coming out of this school board to go after somebody for small change. And maybe it's not small change, but you had an offer to have it paid. And I know that can't keep happening every time, but we can figure this out. It's food for kids. And what are they getting? If they can't pay for the hot lunch, are they getting a cheese sandwich, peanut butter and jelly? And you're charging them the same price. I just think that's ridiculous. The school board can do better than that. So can the SAU.
Thank you, Joe. Appreciate it.
All right. What's your take on this, Kelly?
So let's sort of tie it into the topic for this week, which is prevent harm. You know, at the beginning of the school year, we decided we're going to do this series that's connected to this pathway to safer schools. I understand the difficulties here, but here's where we're at. It's to prevent harm. And there's lots of ways we can harm somebody. We can do it emotionally. We can do it physically. We can do it by neglect. We can do it by over too much attention. There's ways to do it. And we've talked about this, and there's many ways to harm is what I meant to say there. But there's lots of things that we have to do, and we have to understand there's balance, right? So when we talk about school districts, and this is a single sample of what's occurring all over our nation. There are people who have solutions that have been paid for, that have been bought, and now they're waiting for somebody to put it in to make it convenient for them, make it whatever, right? We're coming off the summer, and the summer is usually when that stuff happens. We're into the beginning of the fall now, and like they've said, this came on the heels of the Appalachia High School shooting, and so now there's a concern. Why is it now, though? Why is it happening that these concerned citizens have to wait to make sure that the school is following through with not only a security issue, but a fundamentally basic security issue? Locking the doors, preventing, like you said, people from entering the school whenever they want at night. Was there an alarm? Sure, there was an alarm that happened. But essentially, that homeless person, was able to access the school relatively easily and walk through the school, get into some showers and start showering. We have solutions, but the solutions don't count unless you've actually implemented them. When I say implement, and I'm going to bring this up, even though Ethan and I agreed probably we should stay away from this. But once we've looked at implementing a solution, we have to make sure people are, one, trained in it, and they know when and how to use it. And we have to hold those people accountable to that level, because as a district, as a school board, as the center of community activity, our people trust you to protect our kids. And like we said, that comes in all forms. So the incident that we talked about were two students who got into a fight. And without going into the specifics and the exact circumstances of the incident, because if you were to, there's other things at play here. What I do want to do is say there was a fight between two students, one significantly larger than the other. One had a significant advantage and was winning the fight in a manner that one student was bashing the head of another student on a concrete sidewalk or curb. That could be fatal. That kind of activity could be fatal to the one who was losing that fight. This wasn't just the schoolyard fight. This was something beyond that. In the state where I came from, this would be considered assault with a deadly weapon, even though the one student didn't actually have a weapon, but was using the concrete as the weapon and was bashing the other child's head into the concrete, while staff members were sitting around not intervening. And the school board response, we train our people how to de-escalate. We do this, we do that, and we trust our people to do that.
This event happened in Maine.
You can't say, I trust my people to do that, when they obviously failed for one child here, right?
Failed miserably.
They failed. That one child ended up being admitted into the hospital with some facial injuries and some head injuries. I think the principal said something to the effect, I only intervene if there's any danger to the student. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about preventing harm, not judging how much danger they're in. Preventing. That means no harm. That means no injuries. That means no victimization. And one who clearly has an advantage, regardless of the circumstances, when one clearly has an advantage over the other, that is a classic bullying situation. And they're going to overpower somebody. And that cannot happen. We cannot allow that to happen. And we have to act. If there were two children fighting, generally speaking, that's a time when we should intervene. Period. End of story. When you say prevent, I don't think that means waiting until somebody gets hurt.
Usually not. No.
When you say my goal is to prevent, then we should stop anyone from getting hurt. That's what baffles me about when somebody says, "Oh, I didn't do this because," and then somebody gets, severely injured in this case. What were they trying to prevent? At what point do they decide to get involved? Again, in our pre-production discussion, we were talking about these actionable items, right? When do you decide to respond? We looked at, and generally speaking, when we talk about the following that I'm going to talk about, we're talking about major crisis and human nature and their response to crisis, right? And that's what we're talking about. And I've talked about this a few times. A study and subsequent actionable items created by Amanda Ripley. And that's the deny, deliberate, decisive action, right? Or that decisive moment. And generally speaking, that's what we're talking about is these large incidences. And this was all developed in the wake of the onslaught of active shooter situations. And we wanted to know why you have this sort of fight, flight, or freeze moments and what is actually causing that, right? And if you read her book, she goes into a lot of that stuff. Suffices to say that the running is that decisive moment, right? The fight is a decisive moment, but that freeze is kind of I don't know what to do. I'm deliberating. I'm trying to figure out what's going on. And so, generally speaking, there's a lot of people who don't respond to things, or they try to justify things in their mind. I thought it was fireworks. I thought it was the backfiring of a car. I thought somebody broke a car window. All of these things, because that's what they're familiar with, right? But the reality is, crisis comes in all shapes and sizes. And you can't tell me that when you have these two students fighting, one who has a clear advantage over the other, that one of or both of them weren't in some sort of crisis, right? And the response to that crisis was exacerbated or expanded to involve the staff that sat around and watched and says, well, I didn't think there was anything harmful going on, as one student's getting their head bashed into the concrete. I don't know when the intervention actually came, but if you don't understand head trauma and the serious nature of head trauma caused by abrupt and violent impacts, spend one Sunday watching one weekend, whether it's college or professional football, and see how many people, one, have head trauma with a helmet on that are pulled out of the game because they were knocked unconscious, or there was some sort of thing going on with, you can tell when somebody has a concussion.
Yeah.
And so forth. So I would venture to say any staff member who did not immediately intervene was going through this denial process, this deliberation process, and at some point either failed to get to the decisive moment, or somebody else intervened, or what have you, right? Because at some point, the victim student, the loser student, however you want to say that, was transported to the hospital. So I don't know the intervention there and when that occurred, but it occurred too late.
There is video of this, so Kelly doesn't want me to show it. That's fine. But so you can find it out there pretty easy. Just type in those keywords and you'll find it pretty quick. But there was 3 adults surrounding what was happening, and they were just kind of like, what do we do?
Yeah, that's
It's
exactly
like,
right.
hello, you pull the kid off
You stop,
and you separate them.
right? This has been going on for hundreds of years. Kids fighting in school. And there's specific circumstances around here that I don't want to get into because there's politics involved. And I don't want to get into those politics. The fact of the matter, when you boil it down to its essence, you had two students that were fighting. One had a clear advantage, size and physical advantage over the other one. And if this wasn't a circumstance where you had every right to immediately intervene, even before it became physical, this was clearly that time. And that's what we're struggling with. That's where we're getting into. And this is all part, like we said, of preventing harm. And we're not talking about I throw a punch, give you a black eye. There's all kinds of harm that occurs. And we see it time and time again in eventual active shooters, how much and how often they were bullied before they participated in their own act of violence, right? We've talked about this ad nauseum about how the bullying cycle, how generally speaking, the victims learn the behavior and they become bullies themselves. And they're more likely to become the active shooter because that's the only way they can figure out how to take that power back that they've lost over these many years. And they've struggled and they've tried to figure out the proper solution, but have failed over and over and over again. And nobody seems to be helping. Nobody seems to be solving that problem for them. And then at some point, they become grieved and they start looking at violences and they start walking down that pathway to violence. And while that's a good indicator of when you're dealing with somebody who's making threats and stuff, we've talked about this before. There's many opportunities, thousands likely opportunities for us to intervene and take proper action to prevent harm. And when we say prevent harm, if you're to follow or understand the zero now mission, 0 victims. Why? Because that's the only acceptable number. And when we talk about 0 victims, don't just jump to the victims of acts of violence. Victims in the school, victims of being bullied, victims of being isolated, victims of the culture. If we're adults in this system and we are charged with finding solutions to protect our kids, we have to protect our kids from all harm.
I thought it was pretty interesting, though, the video that we did show of the school board, that one of the parents, I'm assuming he's a parent, brought up that what you just said, like, hey, I've noticed that we've had like 8 accounts of bullying, and she kind of brings up like, hey, these are the type of kids that are probably more likely to come in and probably resort to violence because they feel that that's their only option to resolve the issue. And I'm like, wow, like someone actually gets it, actually brought it up. I was like, and then she made the comment like, hey, it can happen anywhere. I'm like, this is such like a breath of fresh air rather than it'll never happen here, the phrase that we hear a lot. So It was refreshing to hear that someone, has a better way of thinking about it.
Yeah, but how far are we willing to take that thought, right?
Yes.
And that's why when we do threat assessments and we start looking at intervening with somebody who's making threats, we have to look at, if we're looking, and this happens fairly frequently, not always, but enough that it's a thing, is sometimes there's a hit list. Somebody who specifically is going to be targeted as a result of this future or past act of violence, right? And as responsible safety practitioners, we can't just intervene on the one making the threats. We have to look at that hit list and see why they're on that hit list. Why are they being targeted? Generally speaking, I can say this, I'm not a researcher and I don't have the statistics on this. When you look at the cycle of violence, the cycle of bullying, Violence is generally a learned behavior, and bullying is generally a learned behavior. And if we're to subscribe to the philosophy that bullying is a learned behavior and that a pretty significant majority of our active shooters are bullies, they learned it from somewhere. And if we're to break that cycle, we have to look at why they are now trying to take that power back. What happened in their life? And it could be many, many things. It could be your basic schoolyard bullying. Don't say that lightly, but that happens all of the time. That is not an uncommon phenomenon. It's not just there are, I would guess, I'm going to say this with a very vague, there are a significant number of bullying incidences occurring in every school every day as we talk right now. So you can't say, oh, we don't have bullying in our school. I could argue that in every case. Doesn't make me right, but I'm pretty sure I would be. So we have to look at that. And this other concept that we have talked about in school safety, and now we're going to talk about it really in the context of preventing harm is, and we talked about this a little bit in pre-production, is the redefining of what response is. We've talked about this as almost as synonymous, the two terms as response and reaction as being synonymous. Here's the difference. When you react to something, that's generally spur of the moment, and there's a specific set of circumstances that you see and you're going to react to. So we got to get out of the reactive side and into the proactive side. But that doesn't preclude us from responding to what we're seeing. We just have to respond sooner. And I'm going to bring this up, and this is going to be the second time for firsts on Coffee with Kelly. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen.
Second time for
First on this podcast. We showed a video.
We did.
And now we're going to show a Kelly slide. What you're seeing now is an expanded version of the left of bang. We've talked about left of bang quite a bit over the past almost 2 years now.
I think you've probably mentioned it probably about 37 times now.
That's it?
Yeah.
37? I would venture to say it's more than that, because sometimes I mention it like 72 times.
3 or 4 times within one podcast.
Right. So here's what we're looking at. You can see that this right here is the 2 arrows is your timeline. Bang is that point in which your crisis has been triggered. That bang can be anything. It can be the weather. It can be shots being fired. It can be an explosion. It could be a fight. It could be a riot. It could be anything. Anything that causes you to go from your current normal state into the crisis mode. Generally speaking, we want to work on things that are left of bang, because left of bang is where we can prevent, where we can prepare, and where we want to live. Because if we live on the left, we never have to have bang, or the probability of us getting to bang significantly decreases or increases, whatever I'm trying to say there. We don't get there, because that's where the preventative and the intervention occurs. When we talk about things like panic buttons and so forth, we're talking about waiting until the first shot's being fired. And we're waiting until the earthquake happens. And we're waiting until the fire happens. We're waiting until the fights occurred and so forth. But here's the thing, and Ethan and I were talking about this. If we have a threat, and again, that threat can be anything. That could be the weather. That could be anything that's going to bring us harm. It could be a fight. It could be a wild animal running in the hallway. It could be anything. Threat is when you identify that if you don't act soon, something bad is going to happen. This is where we really should be playing. We should be looking at ways to prepare and prevent this threat from ever occurring. But once we identify that there is a threat, we have to take action. And the sooner we can take action, we can live in the green. And again, this was built under the concept of an active shooter, but your perpetrator could be an animal. It could be anything, right? That's the thing that's going to cause you heartache and is going to send you into crisis. Down below is everything that we are doing as safety officials: security, locking doors, preventing harm, feeding our kids, all of that stuff, right? If we get here and we notice that there's a threat and we act, we have a much better opportunity to prevent it from ever harming anybody. This goes back to what I've been talking about with see something, do something. It's not just say something, but do something. Take some action so that you can help prevent this from ever occurring. If you start getting closer and closer to 0 hour or bang or the intersection of the X and Y axis, however you want to refer to that, the more likely you're going to enter into crisis mode. Maybe we want to press the lockdown button instead of the active shooter button. We can isolate everybody. We can put them into a protective action while we locate and isolate the person who is threatening us. And then all is good because we've isolated them. We've isolated the threat. If we start that process and we have taken action and we haven't quite located, at least everybody is secured. Nobody's moving around. That gives us a much better opportunity to find somebody and work through that. It buys us time. And that's oftentimes what we need, is to buy more time. If you don't do anything here, you identify the threat and you just say, okay, we're going to go try to find him, but nobody else knows what's happening or who you're looking for or why you're looking for him, then you start getting closer and closer to 0 hour when the bang occurs. This may sound familiar to people.
When I look at this diagram, depending on the situation, like this could be representative of days or it could be hours, depending on the situation. So
I mean, in a weather event, hours, days.
Yeah.
Sometimes, right, we get warning that the hurricane is coming, right? But we don't know exactly where it's going to get. But if we start looking here before this happens, then we can start saying, okay, we're going to keep watching this for the next 5, 6, 7 days. Whenever it's supposed to hit landfall near us, we can start saying, okay, these are our considerations. When are we going to close the school if it continues on this course?
Yep.
Are we going to open our schools to shelters? If we have to evacuate our schools, where do we send all of our kids? If we're going to send all of our kids and our families out because the state says we have to evacuate, do we have the ability to provide them with some sense of normalcy and going to school? Can we give them all laptops and so forth, which a lot of schools have now anyway? But can we give them virtual learning for a day or 2 days or 3 days, right? So right now in the state of Virginia that was impacted by Helene pretty significantly, some schools are just now getting back and we're 2 or 3 weeks beyond Helene. And they're trying to figure out how they're going to make up the 2 or 3 weeks they lost of education and instruction. That's responsive. Proactively would have said, okay, maybe we're not going to do anything for the first couple of days, but then what are we going to do? What if we don't have power? There's some areas still in North Carolina and Virginia that don't have any power. How are we going to get those kids educated? If we think about that in that 5, 6 days beforehand, when we see this coming, then those decisions have already been made and putting those into motion become much easier. But you're absolutely right. This could be days, weeks, and in some cases, years. Because when we talk about the bullying's over many years, generally speaking. Very rare is it just so rare. I'm not actually aware of any time when somebody was bullied so significantly in one event or just a couple of events that they resulted to violence as a result of that. You might get into a fight or something. I suppose that could be part of it. But here's the deal. If you don't respond, the threat still comes at you. Even if you're not responding to it, it's still moving forward. And the closer you get to this, the more dangerous it becomes until the actual attack happens or the triggering moment happens. And then it is all hands on deck. And now you're in crisis. The threat itself is in crisis and things are moving very, very quickly. Relatively speaking, this is a very short time, and whatever's causing you harm is going to resolve itself. It's going to isolate. You're going to isolate the threat. Or the threat's just going to move on. In the scenario with weather, that threat's just going to move on. And it's going to no longer be your problem, except it's your problem, because you still have to respond to everything that happened as a result. So now you look at your initial response. So in the case of an act of violence, you have your law enforcement, your fire, your medical personnel all coming in. This is chaos right here. Now you're dealing with the aftermath in this block area. And now you're getting all the patients to the hospital, all of the students accounted for, who's doing what, who has what, so forth. And then you get into this little bitty rectangle here where your incident has been stabilized. All the patients have been transported to the hospital and so forth, but then it's been stabilized. So now you're just essentially cleaning things up. You're tying all of the loose ends up. But now you have the recovery, the reunification, that sort of thing happening. And this actually goes on for many, many years. People have talked to students who were present at Columbine almost 25 years ago, and many of them are still struggling. They're working through it, but they're still struggling. There's not a day that goes by that they're not thinking about what happened or what could have happened. This goes on for years and years and years. So whatever's causing you issues moves on, but you're left with the aftermath if you don't address it before. And this is what preventing harm is all about, is getting it. And I think, Ethan, you used a good analogy, and that's you have a car at the top of the hill that has faulty brakes, and it starts sort of moving down the hill. It's much easier to stop that car at the top of the hill and put blocks under it and take whatever actions so that car doesn't go out of control down the hill than it is to jump in front of that car when it's gained a bunch of momentum and it is now moving down the hill. Even at a slow speed, you don't want to jump in front of that car to stop that car.
No.
Right. But in crisis, that's kind of what you got to do, right? Is you got to jump in front of it after it's already started. Why would you want to work in that environment? You wouldn't. Get out in front of it. Operationalize your plans as soon as possible. At the soonest hint that you have a threat, whatever that threat is, whether it's weather, whether it's an act of violence, anywhere, got to get in front of it. And that's what we're really talking about, preventing harm. Now you take that back to the video. We have budget approved. We have vendors approved. We have all of this stuff approved, yet no locks. And I don't think anybody actually said it on the video, but this seems to have started last year. Did you get that impression?
I didn't really understand quite the timeline, but
yeah, I got the impression that it started some time ago, at least before school started. And when you talk about what really should be taken as a wake-up call is you have somebody who broke into your school relatively easily.
Yeah.
I think some people are probably not identifying that as a point of wake up.
Yeah, a lot of, even on social media, people were just praising the efforts of, law enforcement getting there so quick, and that the alarms worked, and yay, the alarms worked and all that. But like, not a lot of people were asking the question of, okay, but how did he get in, and what are you going to do to stop that from happening again?
Right. And what is an alarm for?
Is a response to something that's
Already
happened.
occurred. Yep.
Already occurred. Yes.
Yeah. So most alarm companies want to advertise, so they put this place is protected by alarms that are connected to law enforcement or what have you, right? They put those on every window when they put them in. That still didn't prevent this person from going in.
Just notifies.
Right. And we talk about it all the time. People believe, and I still hear this pretty regularly, that cameras prevent things from happening.
No,
they don't, unless you have some AI attached to it, which is more and more becoming a thing, right? Because AI can tell you, oops, that's whatever's happening on that frame right now is not good. So it's monitoring. I don't know of a school district, I can't say none, but very few school districts in the United States can afford to have 24-hour monitoring of their cameras. Even the large districts that you would think might be able to, in order to do that for 100 schools, you're talking about Kennedy Space Center big monitors and things, like the number of monitors that, I mean, it's not unheard of to have 100 cameras in a school, right?
No.
And if you have 100 schools, you're talking what's that, 10,000 cameras or something?
Yes.
So
add the zeros, Kelly.
Add zeros, right? If we were able to say that cameras themselves prevent something from happening, we would have 0 bank robberies in the United States. 0. But we don't. We get them all the time, because all cameras generally do at this stage for most of us is, some of them don't even record until you press the button, but they record. We can go back later and look and see what happened. That's not a position that school safety should be in. So cameras, are they useful? Yes. Do you need them? Yes. But understand there are limitations. They don't prevent anything. Somebody wants to get in, there's nothing the camera can do to prevent that person from doing what they want to do. That's where locks and people, districts, they do things that can actually prevent people, or at least give you enough time and notification to understand that something is happening so that you can respond to that. Let's look at moving our response from something that has already happened to left, and start responding to what we know is happening or going to happen to that threat.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. And if you have any questions about what we discussed, leave a comment on our website at crisisgo.com. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on Coffee with Kelly, a discussion on school safety.